Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. You are listening to the account with a news summary for day 388 of the war in Ukraine. Today I have 2 segments and 1 extra article for you. Otherwise, all updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and the international developments, containing updates on the UN Security Council incident yesterday and allegations of Chinese ammunition used in Ukraine. First, though, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. Battles are raging in and around Orikhovo-Vasiliivka and north of Zalizniansk. Fighting also continues in the direction of Bodanivka and near the road running along Khomove. Heavy Russian losses were reported from a failed assault on Khiorivka. In the south, a local Ukrainian counterattack pushed Russian units back from the area around the MiG-17 monument. In general, the front line itself has not changed significantly today. Both Ukrainian and Russian sources reported that Ukrainian forces are regrouping in the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk direction, possibly indicating preparations for a counteroffensive or new reinforcements being sent to Bakhmut. Avdiivka. Battles are reported in southern Avdiivka. The Russian command is trying to expand the southern pincer, but Russian forces are unable to overcome Ukrainian fortifications so far. Russian casualties are starting to mount as they are trying to storm Ukrainian positions. Russian mobilized soldiers released a video today pleading with the Russian military leadership to sort the situation of mobilized units used in assault operations. In the video, they report how their unit lost 70% of the personnel, lost the field command team, and was forced to attack Ukrainian strongpoints and tanks with assault rifles. Oleksiy Dmitrashkivsky, the head of the United Press Center of the Defense Forces of the Tavria Front, meanwhile reported that Russia lost almost 2 companies trying to further its objectives around Avdiivka. A company in the Russian army has up to 200 soldiers. And now for the article I wanted to point out, titled Voices from a Torture Chamber in Kherson: How Russians Tormented Ukrainians. Just a few days after the liberation of Kherson on November 11, 2022, the Security Service of Ukraine reported finding Russian torture chambers in the basement of the former Ukroagroprom Project facility at 15 Pilipa Orlika Street. This torture chamber in particular was infamous in the occupied city. The Russian occupation authorities held locals in inhumane conditions simply because they had refused to collaborate with the Russians. This article by Ukrainska Pravda Zhitia recounts the stories of some residents who survived this horrible place. This article touches on a very heavy subject, and the witness testimonies contain graphic explanations of what happened. Please skip reading this article if you feel like you cannot handle this kind of information. To start the news segment, a quick look at the aftermath of last night's drone attack. As mentioned in yesterday's report, Russia launched a drone attack on Ukraine last night. 11 out of 16 Shaheds were intercepted according to the Ukrainian Air Force. In Novomoskovsk, Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, it was reported that 2 Shahed drones hit a critical infrastructure object. Videos shared on social media show a huge fire burning near the city. Additionally, 3 Russian drones hit non-residential buildings in the Yavoriv district of Lviv Oblast, and another 3 were shot down by the Air Defense Forces, Maxim Kozytsky, head of Lviv Oblast Military Administration, said. A quick update on today's anniversary. Today is the 9th anniversary of the annexation of Crimea. Russian President Vladimir Putin visited the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula 9 years after proclaiming its occupation official. According to RBC, Putin came to attend the opening of the Korsun Art School and Center in temporarily occupied Sevastopol. Several countries stated on the anniversary that they had not and will not recognize the Kremlin's illegal referendum and subsequent annexation of Crimea. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine emphasized that the liberation of the occupied territories of Ukraine, including Crimea, is only a matter of time. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. Hanna Maliar, Deputy Defense Minister of Ukraine, said that those mobilized are not sent to the front line without proper training, and the issue of sending subpoenas through DIA is not even discussed. The deputy minister said that Russian propaganda uses fakes and myths to discredit the mobilization campaign in Ukraine. Maliar also noted that Ukraine does not mobilize women without their consent, even doctors. A woman who is liable for military service can receive a summons only to clarify the data. According to the law, they are obliged to do this every 5 years. The Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, announced the government reshuffle today. According to him, the Minister of Education and Science and the Minister of Strategic Industries will be dismissed and replaced next week. Additionally, Deputy Prime Minister Mikhailo Fedorov will be responsible for additional areas beside digitalization. His future position will be Deputy Prime Minister for Innovation, Development of Education, Science and Technology, and Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. The US-made ANTWQ-1 Avenger self-propelled surface-to-air missile system has arrived in Ukraine. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. In the morning, explosions rang out in Sevastopol in temporarily occupied Crimea. Mikhail Razvozhayev, Russian-installed governor of Sevastopol, wrote on his Telegram channel that military training is underway in the city. There have been no further details. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. According to a claim made by Andriy Yusov, a spokesperson for Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, the Kremlin is searching for Russian President Vladimir Putin's replacement amid growing dissatisfaction with the war in Ukraine and the arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court. Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a law on tougher punishment for discrediting the participants of the special military operation. Punishment for alleged fake news about the Russian army carries a maximum penalty of 15 years in prison. In the suburbs of Moscow, a fire broke out on the territory of one of Russia's largest chemical enterprises, Tongki Organicheski Syntes, in the settlement of Dolgoprudny. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. Yesterday, the UN Security Council voted against allowing the so-called representative of the DPR on human rights to participate in the meeting. It is suggested that Russia was planning to divert attention from the arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin issued by the International Criminal Court. The Ombudswoman of the Donetsk People's Republic, Daria Morozova, criticized the decision, saying, "It was not just a speech by the Ombudswoman, it was the voice of the entire people of Donbas." The report to the UN Security Council Morozova was supposed to present is filled with Kremlin propaganda, claiming that in the spring of 2014, the Kiev regime, which came to power as a result of a coup d'etat, sent an army to suppress peaceful rallies using aircraft, artillery, and weapons of mass lethal action. US President Joe Biden says the International Criminal Court's case against Russian President Vladimir Putin makes a very strong point, as he voiced support for the investigation into Putin's alleged war crimes. The United States plans to continue providing large-scale humanitarian and budgetary support to Ukraine and is going to transfer $7.4 billion in aid to the Ukrainian side through September. The United States has confirmed that Chinese ammunition has been used on the Ukrainian battlefield and suspects that they were fired by Russian forces. It remains unclear whether the munitions were supplied by China, US administration sources said, adding that Washington was prepared to take action if it was confirmed that Beijing had made the deliveries. A study conducted by the International Working Group on Russian Sanctions says that while sanctions are working, they could be even tougher, and 2023 could be a turning point in their economic impact on Russia. And now for the Intelligence Report segment, starting as usual with the UK Ministry of Defence. The Russian authorities are likely preparing to facilitate wider military conscription to resource its military requirements. On March 13, 2023, Russian Duma deputies introduced a bill to change the age bracket for conscription to men aged 21 to 30 years from the current 18 to 27. The law is likely to be passed and would come into force in January 2024. Russia has continued to run conscription call-up cycles twice a year since Soviet times. They are distinct from the exceptional partial mobilization of veterans carried out since September 2022. Russia continues to officially bar conscripts from operations in Ukraine, though at least hundreds have probably served through administrative mix-ups or after being coerced to sign contracts. Many 18 to 21-year-old men currently claim exemption from the draft due to being in higher education. The authorities are highly likely changing the age bracket to bolster troop numbers by ensuring that students are eventually forced to serve. Even if Russia continues to refrain from deploying conscripts in the war, extra conscripts will free up a greater proportion of professional soldiers to fight. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The Institute did not publish an extensive assessment on any major topics today. I will skim over the two bigger points and just mention the headlines for the smaller, unimportant parts. Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin during a state visit to Russia from March 20th to 22nd, likely to discuss sanctions evasion schemes and Chinese interest in mediating a negotiated settlement to the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping plan to sign bilateral documents and discuss their countries' partnership. It is suggested that the Chinese president likely plans to discuss sanction evasion schemes with Russia. This comes amid reports that Chinese companies have sold rifles, drone parts, and equipment to Russian entities. Western intelligence has also suggested that China might consider providing lethal aid to Russia. Chinese President Xi Jinping is also likely seeking to position China as an impartial third-party mediator for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko confirmed that Belarusian industry is supplying Russia with electronic components, potentially supporting previous ISW assessments that Belarus may assist Russia in evading Western sanctions. The Institute previously assessed that Belarus is likely planning to facilitate sanction evasion for Russia and that China might use Belarus to transfer goods and/or equipment to Russia. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić's rhetoric about Belgrade's refusal to sanction Russia is softening. The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian Commissioner on Children's Rights Maria Lvova-Belova on March 17th for alleged war crimes involving the deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. Russian outlet Nezavisimaya Gazeta reported that it did not submit a press request to Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin concerning a rumored plot by Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev against him. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The Russian Federation continues to conduct offensive operations in the Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Marinka, and Shakhtarsk directions. Bakhmut remains the epicenter of hostilities. Without the desired result on the battlefield, the Russian Federation uses terror tactics against the civilian population. It is shelling cities and villages as well as critical infrastructure facilities, disregarding the norms of international humanitarian law. The training of units of the territorial troops of the armed forces of the Russian Federation continues at the training grounds of the Republic of Belarus. In the Kupiansk and Liman directions, the enemy continues to try to break through the defenses of our troops. The enemy led unsuccessful offensive actions in the areas of the settlements of Dibrova, Verkhnokamianske, and Spirne. In the Bakhmut direction, the enemy does not stop trying to capture the city of Bakhmut. Our defenders repelled enemy attacks in the areas of Orikhovo-Vasiliivka, Hrihorivka, and in the northern part of Bakhmut. In the Avdiivka, Marinka, and Shakhtarsk directions, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the areas of Kamyanka, Siverna, Pervomaiske, and Marinka settlements. In the Zaporizhia and Kherson directions, the enemy is conducting defensive operations. The Russian occupiers continue to use civilian institutions on the temporarily occupied territory of the Zaporizhia Oblast for their own needs. In particular, the enemy is using a school building in one of the settlements of Polohi district as a field hospital with 50 beds. In this way, the occupiers are trying to shorten the period of return of personnel from the number of sanitary losses. In Rubizhne, Luhansk Oblast, the local occupying so-called authorities are forcing the population to obtain citizenship of the Russian Federation. Ukrainian passports are not taken from people yet. However, for employment it is necessary to have a passport of a citizen of the Russian Federation. And that concludes today's report. If you're interested in any of the details of the articles I mentioned, you can find links to them in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. I hope you will join me again tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.